Okay, so the Nieuport, I started by making those cabane struts. Those are just brass wire in the middle. I'll show you how I make the V-struts. It's very much the same. And they've been glued on and to the fuselage. And the nice part is they're just very straight and symmetrical on the real airplane. Everything's up and down and things. Now, I had to remove my windshield because those rear cabane struts were interfering with that. So I just put that on later. So the idea is I tested this many times, and I poked little tiny holes with the brass into these where they're supposed to go. And with those little brass pins, it fits really well. It fits just as well as any plastic model. And you just kind of put it in there. These have been glued on, by the way, with super glue, so they're pretty strong. And you just make sure it's, again, straight. You're trying to make sure everything's perpendicular. So some of the off-camera stuff, I apologize, but I'm just kind of looking to making sure things are straight. Don't want the wing leaning. You don't want kind of weird dihedral, whatever. So now it looks pretty good after doing a bunch of tests. And then down there is where you're going to put a V-strut. And then there's that little hole down there. That's where the bottom wing is going to go. And my bottom wing, remember, has a piece of wire in it. So that's what's going to happen. And that glued on very easily. It was super, super simple to do. So there's my one finished V-strut. And what I'm going to do is show you how I made the V-struts. They look pretty good. But what you do is you have the background drawing of the V-strut. It has a little tiny hook at the tip. So I take a pair of, and because it's brass, it's super easy to bend. So I just bend that tip, and then I just start matching it up. You can see I bent it too much there. On the drawing, there's a little green stripe that shows where the dimensions, the scale dimensions of the wire. Still got to do more. So this is just a matter of playing around with this wire and making sure you get it so that it looks good. Now down at the base, I do something strange. I grab it down there, and I actually bend a piece out like that, and then I grab a pair of pliers, and I actually bend that little part back on itself. So basically there's a plug going straight down. It's not a single piece of wire. It's going to be a piece that's crimped on itself, and I'll show you what that means. And that's the way I do a lot of these V-struts, because a lot of times they're just sort of, they're in there, but then there's no way to really put it at the bottom, or they're separate. There's no way to really plug them in. So what I do is I figure out where the little piece that protrude would be, and see, I bend it over. And when I actually get this together, it'll be easier to show you. It's hard to describe what I'm trying to do. And then I grab the pliers and I squeeze that little part shut. So what I've done is basically made an extension that goes into the bottom wing, and it's basically the two wires stuck together. You see that? That's what I do. I do that on all those V-strut kinds of things, because that way the V is all contiguous, and I still have a little plug to put in, so it works fine. So now I'm just making sure this is all good and straight. You don't have to worry about the overhang on the top there. Who cares? Because you can cut that off when you're done. So the next thing is to put the paper strut around it. So what I do is use thick super glue, and I very carefully add some super glue to the inside of the strut. And I'm using the picture to kind of, see where the metal part is supposed to go inside. In this case, it's not dead center. It's actually off on an edge a little bit. But I just put this on very carefully. You don't have to put a lot on. You're just trying to get the strut to sort of grab. You do have to put the glue on there. And it takes long enough to dry at this point that you can sort of take your time, get that set up, and then you grab this thing and you set it down as even as you can. And I usually kind of eyeball it. I make sure that the piece that's looking towards us right there has its little plug up above the strut. Make sure everything else is straight. Make sure that bottom piece that I made, that's the folded over piece, is where it's supposed to be. And then I just kind of push down lightly on the brass, and then it's glued in. I found that I don't use then the zip kicker because that just makes it rock hard and it won't move around. It won't, you can't kind of mold it because right now it's still not completely dry. Then I take the opposing side, the sandwich side, and I put a fair amount of glue on there. I smear it around with my finger so it smooths out a little bit. But I want a fair amount of glue because I want it to be malleable so that I can push it and it will kind of squish down over the strut, the wire, and then attach to the other side, glue to the other side. So put this down. And you just have to be careful, but since it's, I think this again is computer drawn, if you cut it right, everything really matches up quite beautifully. And I'm just making sure that I'm that I'm in a good place all the way around, and I'm not having too much overlap or underlap. And then I start pressing to make sure the glue actually starts to grab. And then what I found is with this, I was able to, oh yeah, I turn it over to do the same thing, but I was able to press it down, and then I sort of took my fingers and ran them like that down the metal part of the strut. And my finger, conforms a little bit to the metal, and it rolls around a little bit, and you actually get good contouring of the supposed wooden part. And then I was surprised when I looked at it on an edge, it was actually good. I mean, I thought I'd have to do a lot more. Here I'm just making sure that it's nice and connected on the edges, but and then no edges will be painted, so the white will go away. But this worked really well. A lot of times these struts are made as connected, and you fold the front part over and of the V, and that tends to be harder. I kind of liked them that they were two separate pieces. Then I cut that piece off up in a position that makes sense, and there are the V-struts ready to go. Strong, and they will support the wing no problem. Now, I blew this picture up to show like what the dihedral is supposed to be on the Nieuport. You got to get the right dihedral. And what I found was these V-struts are too long. So in test fitting, when I put them together, they're too long. That's my pantomime for too long. So what I have to do is take that tip off. I took it off all the way down to where that little metal piece is drawn. There's a little gray part. I took it all the way down that way, which is actually quite a bit. But if I didn't do that, the bottom wing was basically flat as a board. And I've had this happen with a couple V-strut airplanes where the V-struts are either too long or too short. I'd rather have them too long because cutting back is easier. But what I do here is remove the paper on both sides, get it all cleaned up, and then trim off the brass. And the differences are very small, so you don't need to really replace this. I didn't have to change where they're going to go in the wing, like the holes. So that's kind of nice. I also needed, though, to take that hole, which is where the spar is supposed to go. I had to lower it down, because if I didn't lower it down, I couldn't get the right angle. So I'm taking a pair of tweezers that are pointy and just making a new hole. That's kind of crude, but it works. To start this, again, I test fit these a few times to make sure, but I put a little glue on the top part of the V-strut, and I'm going to put those in the top wing. And the top wing, what's nice about doing in the top wing first is it's easy to get the geometry because it's just supposed to be vertical. It's supposed to be perpendicular to that lower surface of the wing. There's no canting. There's no like a Hansa Brandenburg aircraft. There's weird angles. This is just right ups down, perfect. Then I put a little blob of glue on the tip of the V-strut with my larger part, and then I put some glue on my wire that's going to be my spar that goes in the bottom. And the single spar on the top wing, by the way, hasn't been a problem, nor has doing the bottom wing splitting it into two. That's been fine. So then I stick that little piece in, and then I kind of pull it back and slide the spar in. And then I just spend some time making sure it is the right angle and that it dries and is good. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. Went together great. So I'm making sure my angle of attack is right. I'm looking to make sure my dihedral is right. Now on this little video, I think because of the camera, the dihedral might look a little weird, but it actually is the correct dihedral. It looks fine. And so I'm checking to make sure that everything is good. Like from the top, you should see the trailing edges of the wings protruding. So I'm just making sure everything is where it's supposed to be. And it right now looks really good. So there's the top wing on and stable. It's really strong. It's great. Fantastico. Really nice. Now, I look in the cockpit and see my joystick there. It's canted over to the left, which means my left aileron has to be up. So I push the stick that way. That aileron has to go up, destroy the airflow and the lift, and that wing drops. So I'm adding the ailerons, putting a bunch of, oh, that's the glue bottle. Putting a bunch of glue along that piece, and then smearing off most of it. And again, I never did put those little pieces that were supposed to go into the trailing edge of the aileron positioning on the top wing, because just putting the ailerons on to me was good enough. You don't see them, they look fine, and putting this glue in fills some gaps, so I didn't bother putting that piece in. Didn't seem to make any difference. Probably should have put that in before I put the top wing on, before I put the skin on. But anyway, stick this in, and this case has to be up a little ways, and this glue again is fantastic to work with because it glues pretty quick, and you can hold a position that you want. And I don't want it to be too high, but I do want to show that there's a position that correlates with what's in the cockpit. Now, there it is. It's up. It looks pretty good. I think later I put it down a little bit. I thought it was a little excessive. Do the same thing on the other wing. Now, the only issue I'm having now is I'm trying to figure it out. But, see, that one goes down a smidge. Is that those holes in the center wing section, which is where these aileron bell cranks protrude, they have to match. I'm trying to figure out the geometry, how they actually would look. Would one be up or down? I'm trying to look at pictures of the real airplane. And sadly, most of the period pictures, the ailerons are level. And I guess it makes sense. These aren't with wire. These are all torque tubes, and so they're probably really rather smooth and tight and balanced. So they don't tend to look like that. I wish I'd had should have used my documentation. But in any event, it's looking really good. It's going together very well. Looks like a Nieuport. It's straight. The wings are on, and that's the last really hardest thing. The rest is just landing gear and engine and cowling, and rigging. So it's coming along pretty dang nice. I think it's really pretty. I love the colors. It'll be really nice next to a Fokker E1 or 2.